So I was making a video on a TV show I grew up with and still enjoy every now and then, and I was having fun just sitting back and taking notes while binging the series for the 20th time. But after a while, I decided to take a break and check Facebook. Now, I'm not normally on Facebook because it's Facebook, but it's where I talk to some friends I don't normally get to see anymore and be involved in some reptile groups. And it's in one of these groups that someone shared a documentary, I guess you can call it, from World Animal Protection, an animal rights group. I watched it and holy crap was it terrible. It was filled with propaganda and misleading facts and even some straight up lies about one of the most popular pet reptiles, the ball python. Now, I'm new to the breeding side of things and my new snakes are too young to breed for a while anyway, so I'm still learning that part of reptile keeping. However, I have owned reptiles since I was 12, and more on topic, I've owned ball pythons since I was 19. So I've had 20 years of experience with keeping reptiles in general, and 13 of those years I've owned ball pythons. The people in this documentary admit they don't know much about snakes.
Well, I'm certainly no expert in this area.
Yet they feel that keeping ball pythons is wrong and should never be pets. Let that sink in. They know nothing about keeping snakes and they are trying to convince you why they shouldn't be kept as a pet. I never understood the logic of extremists thinking they know better than the experts because they think they have the moral high ground, which is absolutely ridiculous.
You underestimate my power!
Now, I'm fairly sure they'll never see this, but if this World Animal Protection group sees this video, well, I'm sure they'll try to take me down a peg or two by saying I'm just some internet troll who hides his face, even though when I had streamed on Twitch, I'd show my face much to the horror of everybody watching. But they might have a point if they saw this and made that argument. I'll concede to that. And plus, I felt it would only be right to show how good of pets they make instead of tell you and expect you to believe my every word. I mean, what am I, a propagandist documentary?
I don't know. Maybe.
Hi.
So, yeah. This is me, and this is Samus. She is a piebald ball python. But I'm here on a cheap camera that can barely even do 720p that well. Sorry. To try and explain why I am talking about this documentary. As I explained off camera, the video does a really good job at spreading misinformation about ball pythons. They twist facts to fit their agenda of saying that ball pythons shouldn't be pets, and that the people keeping them are abusing them. What they do to present this agenda is they treat captive bred and wild caught ball pythons as the exact same thing. And while yes, captive bred snakes are not domesticated like a dog or a cat, they are considered exotic because they still retain some wild instincts, there is a behavioral and care difference between a snake that was born in captivity after several generations and a snake that was taken directly from the wild. And this documentary doesn't explain any differences or nuances in that. It goes out of its way to vilify people who keep and breed ball pythons, people like me. But this topic isn't purely a black and white issue. There are parts of the documentary I do agree with, mostly on the importing of wild ball pythons from Africa to America. I'm not an animal rights activist, but I do believe that in 9 out of 10 instances, an animal that is caught in the wild should not be pets. I say 9 out of 10 because there are exceptions to every rule, and I'm not one to generalize with anything. The documentary does generalize, however. It groups all ball pythons and their western keepers as one and the same, and it's an evil brush they paint us all with. So to start the documentary off, this guy and the global head of campaigns in World Animal Protection visit a reptile expo. If you don't know what a reptile expo is, well, it's pretty much like a Comic-Con, but for reptile keepers and breeders. It's like an exotic pet store, and Wizard World had a one-night stand, and this is the baby. Wow, that is a horrible way to explain things. Also, the animals aren't harmed. There are vendor rules in place to make sure the animals are healthy and comfortable while in their temporary display cases. The documentary does not explain this, however. How did he put it exactly?
It's almost like being in a supermarket for reptiles.
This is Aaron Gakowski, a wildlife photojournalist and an award-winning one at that. To give him credit, he deserves his awards because his photos are beautiful. He is very good at what he does. He's also very good at being a person who can spin information and twist facts in a way that fit the narrative of this documentary. One aspect is that he only asks breeders at the show about the snake's genetics and their pricing, as kind of a way to make them more of a money-grubbing, greedy type of person. One example a breeder gives about a single gene being worth a lot is the banana ball python.
Like if it's something that's brand new, you might be talking 20-25K.
For a single snake?
Yeah.
And people will pay that?
Oh yeah, there's been, like the bananas, I think the first banana sold for 50K.
Bananas were 25 to 50K per snake, but today you could find a single gene banana ball python for roughly $200. They are what's known as a codominant morph, meaning that if you breed a banana to a normal ball python, the odds are that half of the babies born will be banana. Over a few years after they were introduced, bananas became a very commonly available morph that's a fraction of its original price. But the thing is that if people only wanted bananas for money, they'd stop breeding bananas and banana combos once the price dropped, which brings me to my next point. Breeders try to produce combinations of snakes with unique genes producing amazing looking animals. The pricing comes from several factors like supply and demand, but two additional factors for snake breeders are the amount of money being invested by the breeder and the odds of producing certain traits. Take a banana and breed it to another codominant morph like the Mojave. The odds here to produce a banana Mojave are 1 in 4, or 25% chance. There's also a 25% chance to produce bananas, a 25% chance to produce Mojaves, and a 25% chance to produce normals. And those odds are per egg. And if you do get that banana Mojave and you keep it and breed it to another 2-gene animal like a cinnamon pinstripe, then the odds are a lot harder to produce a 4-gene animal, 1 in 16, or just a 6% chance per egg to be exact. But on top of that, you have to factor in the cost of keeping these snakes and their parents. There's the electricity bill, heating, bedding, extra tubs, potential vet bills, and food costs for all this. It takes roughly 1 year for a male to mature, but between 2 to 3 years for a female to be ready to breed because they have to be at a certain weight for breeding to be safe for them. Ball python breeding is a risky and money-draining business because it's a huge investment you'll be spending on for years before breaking even. And for the majority of breeders, you don't get rich doing this and you may still need a full-time job alongside this. But people do it because they're passionate about snakes. But after the show, Aaron and Cassandra Conan, the head of global campaigns of World Animal Protection, they talk about what they saw and the misinformation really starts to come out.
How stressful do you think it would be for the snakes to be under these bright lights all day, to be constantly picked up by people, to have no access to food, no access to water?
It would be extremely stressful for them to be in those kinds of conditions. These animals are not being allowed to display their instincts, their natural instincts. They aren't in any kind of natural setting that allows them to fully extend, which is what they do when they eat.
Okay. Those are display cases, not their homes. These snakes are not extremely stressed. And how do I know this? Well, I'll link videos in the description which talks about snake behavior and describe how to tell if one is stressed out. It's species specific, some snakes behave differently, but when you're around them, you can pick up on their subtle body language and kind of understand how they're feeling, similar to, but admittedly more difficult than trying to understand what your dog or cat is trying to say to you. But from what I can see, based on experience, is that they're not nearly as stressed as Cassandra and Aaron are making them out to be. They look calm, and the ones outside of their displays look inquisitive, which are two signs that show that they aren't afraid and they are interested in what's going on. They're not tense, they seem to be very relaxed. As far as these animals not being able to stretch out and eat...
Who the crap tries to feed a snake at a reptile show?
Snakes eat once a week in most cases. You'd feed them either before or after the show. I mean, she talks about these display cases as if that's where they live. They don't live there! I am fully convinced that she has no idea what she's talking about.
Part of this industry is this desire to have the most unique, the most interesting animal that has created this cottage industry where they are, changing the genetics of these animals and breeding them to get unique colors, unique design.
How is this different than breeding a dog or a koi? People breed dogs for different heights, fur lengths, and personalities. People breed koi to produce amazing looking fish. To me, the only thing that I notice between dog and koi breeding and ball python breeding is that the former have been selectively bred for thousands of years and have become domesticated, while the ball python has been around for only a few decades and are still considered an exotic animal. Snakes are relatively new in comparison to the more traditional pets. Though honestly, it almost makes me wonder if there are people back when those animals were still considered exotic and believe that they should remain in the wild too.
to most of us, they're not cute, they're not cuddly. And so we assign a different value to them. They're really like products in a box. And is that how we want to be treating animals? And I would argue no, that it's time that we make a change and that we allow animals to live the lives they deserve.
This is a product in a box. This is a living animal whom I think is very cute and cuddly, thank you very much. This lady doesn't have the authority nor experience to claim that every ball python keeper treats their animals this way. She's taking her personal opinions and are presenting them as facts. Though I mean, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, even wrong ones. Sure, there are some idiots who mistreat their snakes. Those guys are absolute morons, just like anyone who mistreats any animal is a moron. But does that mean that all ball pythons are mistreated? Apparently, according to this lady who knows less about snakes than a potato would, yes.
I believe that wild animals belong in the wild. These animals are not domesticated, and there is no environment that we could create for them, even with our best intentions, even with the best care possible, that would allow them to live the life that they are naturally born to live.
Ball pythons require small dark hiding spaces, a warm side and a cool side in their closures, the temperatures being roughly 90 degrees Fahrenheit on the warm side and 80 on the cool side, 50 to 60% humidity, a water bowl, and food once a week. I could go into more detail, but those are the basics. It's not that hard to replicate a ball python's natural environment. Though yes, truly wild ball pythons from the wild should not be pets. Wild caught ball pythons do not do well in captivity. They are riddled with parasites, they do stress out extremely easily, they are prone to being more defensive or aggressive, though it's not always the case here, among other problems. It is never recommended by anyone to keep a wild-caught ball python these days. Captive bred, however, are different, at least when it comes to ball pythons. They actually do make good pets for those that want a snake. They're very docile, very easy to handle, and do not stress out easily, and they are better adapted to living in an enclosure, and as long as their base needs are met, they are very content. Behaviorally and health-wise, wild-caught and captive bred ball pythons are in different leagues. No amount of a person's feelings or how they believe how things should be is actually how they are. They're just not the same thing. Talk to a real reptile expert and they'll tell you that Miss Conan knows nothing about these animals. She just believes that wild-caught and captive bred ball pythons are the same thing, so it's morally wrong to own any of them. I mean, their agenda is literally in the title, and it is here where Aaron Gakowski in the documentary really shows how they see ball python keepers. He travels to a friend of his in the Czech Republic who is an exotic animal vet. The vet is currently treating a ball python with burns it received from a heat rock. Now, what's wrong with heat rocks? Well, they are a terrible product that is supposed to keep a lizard or snake warm, but it tends to spike a lot in temperatures and the reptile doesn't realize this and keeps hugging the rock for heat, and it gets burned. The guy who owns this particular ball python is either a first-time keeper who got bad advice from a moron, or he is a moron himself. But either way, this does not reflect on the reptile community as a whole. We seek to educate people on better husbandry, not use things that are proven to be harmful to our pets. Now, this scene in the documentary is really meant to pull on the old heartstrings and try to get you to think with your emotions that snakes get hurt both physically and possibly mentally as a pet. Therefore, it's cruel to own them. If that's the case, then get rid of your dog, or your hamster, or your parakeet. Some people abuse them too. Some people accidentally mess up in one area in keeping an animal and didn't mean to do harm to them. But it's abuse, and absolutely no one should have them because of that. Sorry, I don't make the rules here. But it's this part where the vet says something that the documentary uses to paint every ball python owner as people who abuse their animals.
How do you think a snake's quality of life differs from captivity to living in the wild?
Normal population of people know almost nothing about the snakes. They only know that they are carnivores, they are eating rats or mice, and they need temperature. This is maximum knowledge that we unfortunately still have.
People aren't providing them with basic animal welfare.
Honestly, I think I have a conspiracy theory that they twisted the vet's words. Notice the vet specifically says normal people, and in the context of what he says, I think he meant to say that the average person, the ones who don't think about or want to keep a ball python, knows much about them. English is clearly not this man's first language, and so the documentary could have manipulated what he said to prove their agenda right. And as far as providing proper animal welfare goes, it is mentioned by the American Veterinarian Medical Association as a human responsibility that includes consideration for all aspects of animal well-being, including proper housing, management, nutrition, disease prevention and treatment, responsible care, humane handling, and, when necessary, humane euthanasia. The possible moron who bought a heat rock for a snake? He's not providing basic animal welfare. Breeders and keepers who provide ball pythons with this seemingly almost nothing knowledge of proper heating, enclosure size, hides, water, and food, yes, we are providing them with basic animal welfare as defined by official veterinarian organizations. So just shush. From here, Aaron visits a breeder who keeps the snakes in very basic enclosures. And by basic, I mean using newspaper bedding, plastic hides, and ceramic water bowls, and they look like they're not in professionally made racks, like they're in a DIY project of some sort. This is not how reputable breeders keep their reptiles. This type of setup was considered fine in the 80s and 90s when we didn't know much about their care, but now we have reptile care down to a science with many species. So yeah, this setup isn't the best. Functionally, it works. All the base needs are met and the animals don't look stressed or sick, but the guy definitely needs to work on upgrading his enclosures. And just in case anyone asks, this is my rack. I'm planning on upgrading to an ALS rack this summer, but these tubs are more than large enough for my snakes and have everything they need. And despite not needing a hide in rack systems because the tubs act like one big hide, I still provide my juveniles with one anyway so they feel even more secure. But it's interesting that Aaron visits a poor example of a breeder just to really hammer in his claim about all breeders abusing animals. I've been following reptile YouTubers for over a decade now, and all of them treat their animals with care. But I wonder why Mr. Kikoski decided not to visit breeders like Kevin McCurley from Nerd, Billy from Mutation Creation, Chris Hardwick, or any other reputable breeder. It's almost like they're trying to make people who own snakes out to be a bad person. I won't spend too much more time here. They just kind of put one final nail in the Western breeders and keepers are bad and only in it for the money coffin, and use this to transition to going to Africa where ball pythons are found in the wild. However, I want to highlight this moment here.
Well, I'm certainly no expert in this area, but I don't think it's too much to say that these snakes definitely don't have enough room.
Well, you're about half right. You're not an expert. Anyway, Mr. Kikoski travels to Benin where there is a church dedicated to worshipping ball pythons and talks to the priest there. Now, I'm not going to criticize the man's religion itself, however, since this man will be critical of how people in the West keep snakes, I'll be critical back on what he does to care for his deity. I mean, that seems fair, right?
Yeah, sure. Whatever you say, Schizo.
I would like to show you some pictures now on my phone, if that's okay. These images were taken at a reptile expo in America, and this is how people are selling pythons and taking care of them.
Là, ce que je peux dire, c'est que la divinité n'est pas dans son état naturel. Là, on le met dans des vivariums, on le met dans des choses, c'est pas naturel. Or, ici, ça vit naturellement, on s'occupe de lui.
Well, this church has around 60 ball pythons in this naturally occurring, totally not man-made building, and once a week he lets them loose on the town to feed upon mice and chickens and bless the homes of the people there with their visit. How is this natural? These snakes are being prevented from living, oh, how did Miss Conan put it?
The life that they are naturally born to live.
Ah, yes. That's what she said. Right now, you're seeing footage from 2013 of this temple and you get a better idea on how these snakes are being treated. They are revered and well respected, but they are kept in big groups together and they are huddled around the corners in jars and cuddling each other, probably to try and be as hidden as possible in this wide open space. And since they're let loose to feed on mice and naturally occurring domestic chickens, they probably have internal parasites. They may look healthy on the outside, but it's a real possibility that they are messed up on the inside and so they may not be living a long life. 10 years at most, like they would if they were completely wild. Now you'd think that Aaron Kikoski or World Animal Protection would speak out against this too, right? But instead, he listens to the priest and respects that he keeps these snakes naturally, in human buildings, with nowhere to hide. And this guy is the only keeper of ball pythons they showcase as a good guy. Nothing hypocritical about that. Not at all. But from here, Aaron goes to an animal market where poachers and hunters butcher, dehydrate, and sell animal parts for medicine and voodoo practices. I'm just gonna skip this part because this is a scene where I completely agree with the documentary, especially after doing my own research about it. That is a horrible practice that destroys the wild ecosystem, and it's just not a good thing. This scene is pretty disturbing if I'm being honest. But after that, Mr. Gakowski goes to another African country, Ghana, where they claim most ball python imports come from. Here he meets up with World Animal Protection's Wildlife Campaign Manager Edith, I won't even try to pronounce her last name, and discuss the importation side of everything. She talks about the ranchers and the hunters who go out and collect pregnant females, hatch the eggs, and are supposed to release the mother and 10% of the babies, but that's not very well regulated. And as you may notice, I'm getting less argumentative because a lot of the rest of the documentary, save for parts at the very end that still vilifies captive breeding, I do agree with. I don't like that wild ball pythons are still captured for the pet trade. Captive breeding is well established, and it's easier and cheaper to buy a captive bred normal or single gene morph than a wild import that you'll have to spend hundreds of dollars in vet bills to take care of parasites, and it won't even be able to have the same quality of life as one born for the pet trade. 99% of the time, it's just not a good idea, in my opinion. Not stating it as a fact or anything, unlike someone, it's just my thoughts on this. But what's interesting here is that Edith mentions a report from CITES, which is an organization dedicated to documenting wild importation, making sure it's not having a negative impact on wildlife. She says that according to this report, 3 million ball pythons have been imported over the past 40 years, and that they're the most commonly imported animal from Africa. Now, the documentary does not cite their sources, so I had to do some digging, and I think I might have found what Edith referenced. I'm not sure, but maybe. It's a very boring read, not gonna lie. But what's interesting is that the documentary fails to mention a couple of things about importation, mainly that captive breeding has had a major impact on the value of wild-caught ball pythons. Unless we're talking about a new color mutation found, which is incredibly rare, and almost all the time in these instances you're just buying a weird-looking normal, cause snake oil salesmen still exist, but this time they're selling the entire snake. But with that rare exception, the price of wild-caught ball pythons is down to just 1/7 of their original value. They're just not popular anymore. If you go to Morph Market, which functions the same as a Reptile Expo but online, you see that there's barely any imports. Hardly anyone is dealing with them anymore. What's also interesting is that CITES has a recommended list of things people can do to protect wild ball pythons that cut down importation and butchering of these wild animals for the bush markets, and the top thing recommended is captive breeding. You heard that right. The very act that this documentary vilifies is the first thing suggested to lessen the impact of wildlife being taken from their homes. And what's the second thing? Ecotourism. It suggests that keepers, breeders, and worshippers, specifically mentioning the very same church Aaron Gakowski went to, get together to promote ball pythons to tourists and encourage them to protect sacred lands where these animals are allowed to breed. So really, capitalistic ventures such as captive breeding and tourism are encouraged to protect wild ball pythons.
Interesting.
And that's where I'll end things here. If you made it this far, thank you so much, and please let me know if you like me doing videos this way instead of what I have been doing. It is easier to edit, so that does potentially mean more videos for you all, but if you prefer me hiding my hideousness, which I understand completely, that's okay too. I do have a Patreon if you want to support me and help me afford to upgrade my current low budget and fairly cringy setup. I mean, I don't have many tier options yet, but that can change in the future. For now, there's just a $2 tier which gets your name placed at the end of the video, and a $10 tier which has a one-time benefit of allowing you to pick a topic I talk about next, and for as long as you're in that tier, I'll consider any future topics you may want me to do, but again, it's only the first time you suggest a topic is the one that's guaranteed I'll make a video on. Just don't ask me to cover anything politically, religiously, or not safe for work related, please. And with that, I'm gonna head on out. Please do the whole liking, subscribing, and sharing thing, and I'll see y'all later.
Well, I'm certainly no expert in this area. I'm certainly no expert in this area. I'm certainly no expert in this area.
So just shush.